Okay, hello everybody. I'm here to show you my method on how to roast naturals on a Behmor 1600 Plus. I've already gone ahead and done the first step, which is just to preheat the Behmor once with a regular 1/2 pound P1 run, just to get it warm, to get everything nice and toasty. Okay, and afterwards we can actually start the actual process of roasting our beans. So the first step in this process is to actually preheat the Behmor to about 320 Fahrenheit on its B sensor. And the reason why we want to do this so hot is to kind of emulate what a commercial roaster or even an air popcorn popper roaster does, which is actually roast the beans using airflow. Rather than the Behmor, which uses those radiative elements, which sometimes can cause unwanted flavors. So to do this, we actually use the 1 pound setting, and the reason why we use the 1 pound setting is because the exhaust fan kicks in the latest on the 1 pound setting, allowing us to actually preheat it to this temperature without the Behmor complaining the next time you turn it on. So we use the 1 pound setting, we start, and then we automatically set it, or right away set it to P5, and this is the hottest setting, which will allow the Behmor to preheat to 320 Fahrenheit in the fastest possible time. Okay, so I'm going to let this do that, and I'll be back once it's close to that time. Okay, I'm back. It is almost at 320 Fahrenheit at the B sensor, so I'm going to go ahead and get my gloves on and my beans ready. As soon as it hits the 320 Fahrenheit mark, I'm going to turn it off. Take out the chafe collector, pop in my beans, and start up the process. Now I'm going to start up the process on the 1/2 pound setting, and as soon as it starts, put it into manual P5 mode. Now as soon as it starts again, we still want to keep an eye on the B temperature. It's going to be close to 320 Fahrenheit, but it will go down because we opened the door and air came out and so on and so forth. What we want to do is wait till this temperature gets to around 324 Fahrenheit. Again, a temperature really close to that cutoff point of 330, and kind of then have the temperature cruise there. Now I like to actually cruise at the P4 setting. I know many people actually roast on P5 because it's the strongest setting, but P4 I find gets less roast defects. I'm not 100% sure why that is. I'm guessing it's because on P5 the radiative elements actually scorch the beans, while on P4 there isn't as much radiative temperature. So basically, what I'm trying to do this entire time is have the air as hot as possible, but not the radiative elements heat too much. So as soon as it hits 324, I'm going to pop P4 on my manual setting, which will then allow the temperature to now cruise. It might go up a little to 325, possibly 327 at its hottest, but it will now start to cruise. So it will cruise at this temperature until about the 7-minute mark. At the 7-minute mark is when the exhaust fan kicks in. Now at that point, when the exhaust fan kicks in, I find it safe to go ahead and then put it on the P5 setting, because now we actually have airflow basically warming up the beans in a more even fashion than with just the radiative elements on P5. Again, trying to emulate a more airflow type of roast that I found actually just has a better result when roasting naturals. If you ever get a chance to try to roast a natural on just a really cheap popcorn maker, you'll actually find that it probably does a better job than the Behmor. But at least with this roast, you'll do a pretty decent job. Okay, so as you'll notice, my bean temperature is still cruising around 324, 325. And when it gets close to the 7-minute mark, actually before it gets to the 7-minute mark, I'm going to pop it on P5, which will then be the absolute hottest the Behmor can get without it turning off. At this point, it's just a waiting game. So the bean temperature itself doesn't represent the actual bean temperature. The A temperature also doesn't represent the bean temperature. However, when the exhaust fan kicks in, the A temperature has a better representation of the bean temperature than the B temperature does. So really what we want to keep an eye on once the beans get close to first crack is the A temperature, since it's a better representation of the actual bean temperature. So if you'll note in Scott Rao's book, you can read it. I unfortunately don't have it on hand, so I've forgotten some of the things in it, but I'm aiming for about a 7.5 to 8.5 minute roast. I'm sorry, a 7.5 to 8.5 minutes until first crack. You'll see that now my bean temperature has slightly gone up, but still cruising so that I don't have to do anything until it hits the 7-minute mark. So once that exhaust fan kicks in at the 7-minute mark, the bean temperature will start to decrease quite rapidly. You don't really have to worry about this. It doesn't mean your roast is stalling. It just means that the thermistor that's reading the temperature on the sidewall right next to the heating elements is now showing a lesser temperature. The thermistor that is actually reading this bean temperature is one of those screws next to the heating elements. Okay, so now my exhaust fan has kicked in. I've switched it to P5. As I said earlier, now it's safe to do that. We still want to have the hottest environment possible for our beans, so P5 is good at this point. I've noticed that if you roast fully on P5 from the start, you get roast defects such as scorching. I found craters, but that doesn't happen when I roast with the initial phase on P4. So now at around the 4.5-4-minute mark, which is around the 7.5-8-minute roast time mark, is when we'll expect first crack to happen. So what we want to do is start to keep an eye on the A temperature, which when first crack actually starts happening is the best representation we have of the bean temperature. Now the temperature is still scaled by some amount, but at least we'll know that when first crack happens on a typical roast curve, you kind of want the beans to evolve by themselves rather than adding heat to it. So we want to have the temperature when first crack starts to happen kind of steady out. So try to keep it as steady as possible until your first crack has evolved or until the point that you want to stop your roast. You'll see my A temperature now is around 237. I usually expect first crack to start happening around the 250 mark. It really depends on the moisture content of your beans. If you have dry beans, I've had first crack start happen at the 246 Fahrenheit mark. If you have really hydrated beans, I've had first crack first crack start to happen at around the 256 Fahrenheit mark. It all depends on your beans. Okay, so it's been around 7.5 minutes since our roast started. Oh, I heard my first crack. I kind of want to note the temperature of when I hear about one crack every second or more. If it's anything less than that, it's not hot enough yet. Okay, at this point I'm hearing my first crack start to develop. So I'm going to go ahead and hit P2 and note the time. It was around 4:05. I want it to stay in P2 for about 45 seconds or until this temperature returns back to 252 or so. Now, depending on how fast I hear the crack happening or how fast this temperature is increasing, I'm going to kind of open the door to let either the crack settle down and the temperature settle, and then or close it if I hear that the cracks are happening too seldom. So after about 45 seconds, we'll want to return back to P4. Again, really just try to keep a steady A temperature more than anything. See how now it's decreased, so I'm actually going to keep it on P5 because I hear the first crack somewhat dwindling down. Now it started at around about a minute ago, so I still want first crack to happen for about 30 or so more seconds audibly before I stop the roast. So again, still keeping an eye on A, it's around that same temperature where first crack, 252. And now I'm nearing about the time of the 1.5 minute mark of my first crack, which will be at 2:30. So I'm going to go ahead and start my fan up here and go ahead and pop the beans out and start cooling them. Now you'll note that I'm using a giant fan to cool because the Behmor actually just bakes your beans, it doesn't cool them. You'll see an image in the post